welcome.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to talk about, I've got two talks at the meeting. This is my team talk, as it were. And so I'm going to talk about templates, which are prototype document elements, and an idea that the team has been working on since, I don't know, I was still at school, I think. Or Frank and Chris and David have been working on for a long time, but now is... 2000, okay, a bit later then, okay. But has now reached maturity and has been integrated into the LaTeX kernel in the last release, and so is sort of something there that now people can be using and relying upon. So we'll start off, what's a template? So in this context, we're not talking about what people often mean when they say templates, which is they mean a model document that you can edit, which comes from a sort of word processing background. We're talking about a different idea. And the idea is that we want to take the things, elements I've put here, objects, we haven't come up with a good name for this, the components of a document which are same across different documents, and to have a way of providing a mechanism to describe those, edit them, modify them, etc., that doesn't lead to us having to constantly do things, constantly copy code from one place to another, and thus lead to things which can't easily be interchanged. So these were originally, the things we've decided to call them types because there isn't a better name for them. We've tried lots of things. Yeah, so copying code is error prone. You know, you get something, you copy it, you make a change, someone else makes a change, and very soon you can't move things from one place to another. We need to deal with a variety of amounts of variation. So let's take a concrete example. What sort of thing could we be thinking of? And the one that's possibly the most easy to understand is headings, sectioning headings in a document. If we think about lots of documents, lots of articles, books, Beamer presentations, whatever, they have sections, and they have section headings. And if you look at, say, a typical article, the section headings, the subsection heading, etc., are essentially the same, other than they have small variation. They have things like the font size changes, how the numbering is done changes a bit. But then we go to, say, maybe a book, and we might have fancy chapter headings where you want to have a whole page taken up by the chapter heading. It might have a big, little pull quote that goes with the chapter heading. It might have some fancy colours, hopefully, which are colourblind safe or are purely aesthetic to go with it. So that's a larger change, but you need a continuum. And then you might have a situation where, like, this one section heading needs to be different because it's got to match up with something that's externally imposed, and so I've got to be able to vary that. And so what we're looking at in templates is a way of trying to encapsulate that variability, but also repeatability, into something that's into a mechanism which is flexible enough that, depending on the change you need to make, you could either make small changes where you things stay the same, as it were, or you make a bigger change where there's something more significant takes place. Yeah, so it's a mechanism for swapping out how elements are implemented. So we're going to see, I'm going to explain how we can either use the same implementation and change settings, so you get minor variations, or if you need to make a bigger change, how we can have a completely different implementation of how one of these document elements is implemented, but it can be swapped over between different implementations so that the semantics of those elements stay the same, and so that we can carry things forward, and we can try to avoid the situation where you take a different document class, say, and you then can't swap between different document classes because things are done differently and there's some difference in what's expected. So what are the steps to use this mechanism of templates? So the first thing is we have to declare the template type, the thing that we're going to be talking about. So as I've said, sectioning is perhaps one of the most obvious. Blocks are another, so the things in which you put elements on a page. Lists, so it turns out lists need blocks and they need the internal list structure. We might have others as well, and we're sort of developing those over time. And you'll see that actually even for developers, they don't need to worry too much about that because it turns out there's only a very limited number of these types, and essentially probably the team are going to have to worry mainly about those. Then we're going to create interfaces to flesh that out. What might we want to do with this thing? So, say, sticking with section headings, obvious things we want to do is we want to describe how we're going to set the font size, the font color, whether it's numbered, whether it's going to have a quote that goes with it, whether it goes in the table of contents, the title for the table of contents, etc., etc. Different things that we might want to do with it. And so at this point, the stage 2 is to define an interface. Not worry about how this is going to be worked, what LaTeX code we're going to need to use, but just think about, from a design point of view, as it were, what things do we want to be able to say, if we imagine someone who's not a LaTeX user, you've got a book you're doing, you've got a book designer, they're not going to tell you how to implement it, they're going to tell you what they want it to look like and what you're going to need to be able to vary. You're going to need to have your section headings 1.5 times as big as your subsection headings or whatever. They're going to give you that kind of information. So something that would make sense to somebody who's not a programmer and is something that could also, wouldn't also apply to LaTeX or into a tech document, but could be used to equally describe a web page or a Word document or a poster done in design or something, something fundamentally about the design. Then we're going to have to actually do some coding and define an implementation of this interface. What do we do then to take that concept and provide something which we can actually typeset? And then we're going to want to be able to use these things. And we'll come back to that. There's a couple of ways of using templates because of this idea that we can vary how they're used. So template types, the sort of things about which a document is created. There's only really a small number that we've come up with, certainly so far, and it seems likely that most of those will end up being provided by the kernel team, simply because you can only have, there's a namespace for them. Once we've called something, sectioning, or LaTeX sectioning or whatever, that's taken. And really, this stage isn't really about writing any code at all. It's about coming up with defining the semantics. Because what you do have to think about is how many mandatory things does each type have. So sticking with sectioning, we've talked about this on the team quite a bit. How many things are absolutely required of a section in a document? We'll see, what do people think? How many things do people think are absolutely required? It's the simplest question of it's a number. How many things? Think about what the things might be. Tom? 1. You're going for 1, yeah. What do you think that one thing is? Level. You think it's level? Oh, right, that's interesting. Section title, yeah. That's the one that we think we've argued back and forth. We think, sections have a title even if it's empty. Beyond that, everything else turns out to be optional. So at the moment, we're mainly ending up with types. They tend to have maybe 0 or 1 compulsory arguments, and then they need a list of, we're going to have keys, but optional things need to be collected up. So the point is here that we're going to need to, all right, boys?
Well, you would be surprised, but it's not necessary for sections to have titles. I typeset a book of poetry where there was a lot of anonymous poems. So they are sections semantically, but they don't have titles because they don't have, they just.
I take the point, but I think that's one where I'd say they probably all have an empty title. So, so if you have to define some semantics somewhere. So this is not, points out though, very nicely, this is not easy to decide. So although code-wise this is easy, concept-wise it's difficult. But luckily, most people are just going to complain that we make the wrong decisions is probably what will happen. But yeah, so the point is you need to start off with a type. What is it going to be? How many mandatory things are there going to be? And then we're going to, once you've fixed that, and this is the point, every time we implement it, it's going to be the same. So it doesn't matter who implements a particular type, that position is fixed. Then we're going to create interfaces. So I've put up, there's not many lines of actual code in these slides because I thought it's more about the concept, but I thought we needed to at least see a few things so you can see what I'm talking about. So we're going to define some interfaces, and has a snappy name, does the command, declare template interface. And you'll see we have the type, which is going to keep coming back. We're going to have the template, that's going to be the name of the template, the way we're implementing it. Number of arguments, which we just talked about. And then a key list, a list of keys of the settings that this template is going to take. So what I'll say here, so the type is fixed, that's like sectioning. The template is going to be the name of our particular implementation we're creating in general terms. So you might call this LaTeX standard sectioning, because someone else might implement it completely differently and have made different choices about the keys, and they might implement things that simply don't match up with the standard situation. So if you imagine, if you're doing a very arty book, you might decide your implementation is going to have all of your text is always going to be distributed across the whole page, and it's going to have pictures in it and things, and that probably wouldn't fit in with the standard LaTeX sectioning, which is going to be draw a line and put the thing and put a number at the start, basically. Fundamentally, that's what the implementation is going to do. So this is the idea that we're going to see that you can take the type, sectioning, whatever, and then we can have different code because that's going to be the template name. But most of the time, that's the big variation. If we need to do something completely different, we create a new template. But most people are going to want to make small variations. They want a different font size or something. And that's where our key list is going to come in, because we're going to have keys that are going to define the flexibility within this template. Now, I've said here, different templates for the same type could have different keys, and this is something that we still haven't, I guess, 100% resolved. I think it's fair to say that it's probably likely that you want, as far as possible, to sort of agree on the key names, even if you're implementing things differently, because it would be tricky to go completely off-piste. But it's not absolutely required to say, back with, if you imagine some very arty implementation of something, it might have settings that simply don't make sense to a rather more boring academic journal implementation. So you might need some additional keys, but you might need some that are the same. So the key list is going to be things like, these are going to be the flexibilities, So if we take a list, taking a different example, if we took a list, that might be the spacing before the list, the spacing after, how much to indent the side. And that's going to be a variable because fundamentally the implementation over here, when we create the implementation of our template, it shouldn't have fixed values in it. They should all be things we can adjust. We need to work out what they all are. So that's the idea here. So the interface is just going to say, the key list is going to be, say, we might have a very dull names. Yep, I've got a question.
There seems to be a verb missing in that second line. It should be will determine, will provide, something.
Yeah. Good spot. Yeah, will provide, yes. Let's go with provide. It's nice to know people are reading the slides, so everyone's paying attention. It's good. Yeah, so we declare this interface. It's not telling us anything about how we're going to do this, as I say. So the idea is you could give this little bit blocks to someone who's not a hardcore LaTeX developer, and they should be able to sort of work out what's going on, because this key list is going to be the name of the key and what type of value it takes. So it's going to say, font size is a dimension. Level is an integer. So, how, it's a level 1 section, it's a level 2 section, whatever. And that's written out, in a sort of way that it is easy, but meant to be easy for people to understand. So, self-describing is the idea. Then we have to do some implementation. Yeah. Implementation. So, another very snappily named command. Declare template implementation. Again, we've got the type, we've got the template name that we've just created, number of arguments, which always pops up, and then we're going to have key bindings. In other words, these keys I've talked about, what variable do they, how are they actually saved? You know, it's all very well and good me saying I've got font size, but what does that actually do in my implementation? So I'm going to take the key name, and I'm going to point it at a variable that I'm going to save that information in. Because then we're going to get to the code that's actually going to do the job, and obviously that code is going to need to be able to access the information. I'll say the business end. This is obviously, when it comes down to implementing things, this is where life gets hard. You actually have to take your wonderful ideas about how flexible it's going to be, and you're going to have to make sure that your code actually does what you've said it does. So, you know, does it actually let me change the margins of my list and not go just turn out that I just didn't bother and I just hard-coded a value in because I was, you know, in a hurry and I said I'd change it later and then I forgot. Can be given separate from the interfaces in the source. So the idea here is, provided that our template type has already been defined somewhere when we actually run LaTeX, this doesn't have to be in the same place. So again, the idea being that you can split up how you create your templates so that the more user-readable bits are in one place and the bits that are maybe a little bit more scary are in another. So that creates a template. A template is a generic implementation, so it's got keys that are going to sort of set whatever things we are. It's going to have some mandatory arguments, information that is ultimately going to have to come from the document, so for a section, the section title, or Boris's empty section titles, potentially. How do we use it to actually make our document work? So the first thing we can do is we've got a command called use template. So all that does is it says, you know, use template, you pass it the keys that you pass it the mandatory arguments that the type needs, you pass it any keys you want to do. It runs through all that code that I've just talked about. And
pass it the template name.
well, yes, you pass it the template name. Yes, you pass it the information to use the template. This is true. Thank you, Frank. And then stuff happens, and it grinds through, and it does things. But the problem with that is, and one of the things we're trying to avoid is, you've got a key val list, and although key val lists are very useful, very flexible, there is a processing time, and in tech, tech doesn't do that for us. We have to have an implementation. Now, however fast a key val implementation we write, that's still going to be slower than just having a load of macros that are just defined as values. So if we imagine trying to take all of the design elements of a document and making them all into templates, the worry here is it's going to start to get slow. If you think about, if we have every paragraph, let's say we set the hyphenation and justification, that's another potential template, using a templating mechanism, and every time we were reading the key val list, which is almost always the same key vals for every paragraph, and we do that for hundreds of pages, things are going to get slow, too slow. So what we normally do, we expect, is people to make instances. So an instance is going to be where we preset some of those key vals. We say, okay, you know, taking my running example of sections, you know, we're making an article. We've got section, subsection, subsection. So the one that's going to be for section, we say, you know, it's always going to be 12 point, it's always going to be bold, it's always going to have section number. So we know that, so we say we make an instance that's like normal section. And it's going to have those values fixed, and if those values are fixed, what we do is we read through the key vals once, we turn all of that key val information just into defs, basically def, you know, some internal variable, some value. And then when we use an instance, which we'll do in a second, we just very quickly apply those settings, apply that, you know, series of definitions without all of that key val processing. So it's faster, and that's going to make a difference because at that point you can't really do things much faster than just setting dimens, macros, whatever you actually implemented it in. And the key point here is that you can change one template or instance for another and things should still work because they're semantically interchangeable. So I create an instance called standard LaTeX section, and then, or we do, and then you say, oh, and actually this document, I don't want to use the standard one because it's, you know, boring, and I want to have a pull quote in it, and I want to have big swirls around it. and you swap the instance for your one fancy section, but the semantics are all the same, and so it should just drop in and be a straight interchange of one thing for another. This is all very well and good, but users want to do strange things. Oh, the reality is that you need to have flexibility. How do users make changes? So the first thing they can do is they can make document-wide changes with the mechanism. They can edit the instance or template defaults. So we have a command that does that, and that's saying you can take a predefined document. Someone's given you a journal document class. It's using templates, but actually, I need to make a change because I've decided to take a journal document class and use it for my own private document, which you see that quite a bit. People are like, why are you using a journal document class for something you're not supposed, it's fixed for one thing. Oh, I like it, but I want to do this differently. So, you can edit the instance default. So I know that the predefined one says that all sections should be 12 point, but I think they should be 12.5 because it means that it fills the number of pages that I need to show I've written for my report, so I'm going to do that. So, change it in the preamble, change the defaults. When everything runs through, that setting applies to our setup. Everything is done quickly. You're not repassing it every time, and everything stays consistent. We also can have one-off changes. So the mechanism has been set up so that in practice, all of the templates will take a key-val argument point of use, so that if, a classic one here is if you look at people doing lists, use things like a num item currently for changing how you make lists look on an ad hoc basis, and you have an optional argument saying, this particular list, I need to change the spacing slightly because I don't want one item going on to the next page. I want to squeeze it just a tiny bit. And that's obviously a one-off. And so we read that key-val list, and we can apply that. And of course, this then isn't fast because we are reading it for that one use of the template. But if you want ad hoc changes, you are always going to have to accept some processing time. You can also do more complicated things. You can make copies of these instances. So, I want to keep the original version, but I want to have my own version as well because I'm going to have half of my sections look one way and half look the other, and they have one variation between them, and we can copy them across, make a child template, child instance, and then we can unedit it. So the idea of templates here is that we are going to take a lot of design elements that we need in a LaTeX document, make them into a standardized way of implementing them, make it into a way, make this work so that there's predictable and as fast as it can be done realistically, so not have a massive performance hit, and make sure there's sufficient flexibility for the person setting up the document class. They can make their own derivatives. They can make different kinds of template if they need. If our implementations, the standard ones that we end up providing, aren't good enough, you can write your own one, and it should still just drop straight in. Flexibility, as I say, for a document author, for the whole document, or for a particular, one-off instance within the document, without having to have different mechanisms in different places. And that's the point. The idea here is that, a lot of this has been done in different ways by classes like ComaScript or Memoir, packages like a num item, but each one is implemented in a slightly different way, and that makes it difficult to do things predictably. And by bringing templates into the kernel, we are, for the tagging work, we are using the templating system to make new implementations for things. As I've mentioned, lists. Frank did quite a lot of work on that. We've got ones for sectioning, we've got ones for other things. We're bringing those in. And as they get developed, they'll be available to people, so they'll have a single way to change the document design. You won't be having to go, oh, well, this package has to be done this way, and this one, I have to recode this because there isn't an interface for this. We'll be able to add on, where interfaces are missing as well, as we move into being templated, we'll be able to add on those interfaces that are needed in a single way of doing things. And so that's templates as integrated into the LaTeX kernel, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thanks a lot. I see there already one question. Okay.
Thanks. It's a comment, not a question. I do think that template is the wrong word for it, but I do have a suggestion. Maybe you would be better off using the word trait. In computer science, a trait is a formal description of a property or a characteristic of something. And if you think in terms of genetics, for instance, the trait is a specific characteristic of an individual. So for instance, the color of your eyes is a trait of yours, and so is the looks of a section title of yours, for instance. So this is just a suggestion. Traits. Thanks.
I think I get your point. I say we've been through lots of names, and the thing is, whatever you come up with, it's nothing's ever come across as perfect. And we've sort of gone. At some point, you have to make a decision, and we've sort of gone with that. So that's what we've gone with. You know, we could make alternative names and copy things, but I'm not sure we will. No, I think it's been a long time. Yeah, they've been called templates for a long time, and yeah, I think we'll probably just have to stick with it at this point. Hope most people in most of it won't see a lot of that.
Okay, Boris.
Well, not me, but rather YouTube. Okay, there is an interesting dialogue in YouTube and a question. First, the dialogue. User heavenly acts at heavy cost says that there is an observation. Searching for LaTeX template is understandably not very useful since overleaf calls document classes templates, and many users use this, so the word is overused. And Chris Rowley says that it's a useful observation. We shall add what to call them to our ongoing discussion of how to set them templates, exactly what type is, and he also says that other also thinks that the word template is not good. This is a comment, it's not a question, and there is a question. Yes, and there is a question. How do you envision how templates or whatever will affect existing document classes? Will the standard classes employ templates or perhaps a new set of templated version of the standard classes? So basically, how do you do transition?
Okay, well, I mean, that links to Frank. Does Frank want to come in on that one? No, you can leave it with me. Well, I mean, so I was going to say that there are, as I suggested, we've already started using templates for the sort of re-implementation of material to allow tagging. So because the tagging project and being able to reuse information in LaTeX documents for other purposes other than the typesetting direct output means that you need to re-implement things like lists, like how paragraphs are done, like how sections are done. And that, the moment you're going to start re-implementing things, we're going with templates as the way of, because there's always the problem in tech that once you change any implementation, you break someone where they've patched something and they're looking for a particular form of things. But once you decide you're going to have to do that because you need to make changes, then if we are implementing things using templates. So I think in the longer term we will see the standard classes moving in this way. At the moment it's stuff if you're using the document metadata setup, but the vision is that we will be moving that into the standard classes. I think is fair. Yeah. That is the direction of travel. But it is managing that transition is not easy, and that's quite challenging and something we worry about quite a bit.
Okay, sorry.
It's from me, not from YouTube. Maybe the thing would be to do what you did when you switched to LaTeX TUG, just to put some special keyword like use templates. And after this, you don't guarantee that standard classes work the way they used to work.
Well, that's already so the document metadata line that we've got that you currently use for the tag testing, that's the marker line. If you've got that line in, it does mean we are going to be using new methods, and we envision that will become the marker for this. So if that's there, then yes, you know, if people use that, have that in, they should expect that the code they're using will need to use updated methods, and that will lead to some things that won't work immediately, because if they're relying on implementations that then get changed, they will fail. But that's why we're very clear. We've been asked about people putting document metadata into model documents or inside classes and things like. No, don't do that. That's a line that should be the user should be making that choice, and it should be in top level documents used by users.
The line is already there, except that it is not yet a fixed point. I mean, when we made the change from 209 to 2 epsilon in way back, I don't remember, 94, we had a very simple, in some sense, transition because the code was already mostly there, and then we had a year of implementation. We made a fixed jump. We now have already the change point, which is document metadata, but we are not at the fixed point that what document data makes today is what is the final one when we say we are done with tagging and we are done with having sort of modernized classes, having the design part completely done. Those things are in the work, but that's the main goal, to have just this single line deciding that this is a new document. Right now it's a new document in the prototype level, if you like.